Welcome, you're watching World is One News. I'm Aisha Sindhu. It's been 2 days since the terrorist attack in Manchester. After intelligence shared between the UK and US authorities was leaked to the press, it has now emerged that Salman Abedi, the man identified as the Manchester attack suicide bomber, was on the radar of British intelligence. Counter-terrorism officials are facing heavy criticism after the Home Secretary Amber Rudd admitted that Abedi was known to intelligence services. Now, reports say that the suicide bomber was repeatedly flagged by authorities and placed on a watch list. In fact, British media reports have said that Abedi was flagged on at least 5 separate occasions in the last 5 years. Abedi's family was also on the radar. It has now emerged that Abedi's father was linked to a Libyan militant group. In the past, Abedi's 2 brothers were also picked up for questioning on suspicion of terrorism offences. Some rather serious implications emerge after this information has come out. To break it down for us, I'm joined in the studio right now by our senior international correspondent, Padma Rao. Also with me is Daniele Pagani, WION's correspondent. Joining me on the phone line in a short bit is London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark. I'll come to you first, Padma. I mean, it's kind of surprising. I don't even know the exact term to utilize, but 5 times in 5 years, this individual has been flagged. Were the authorities taking a nap?
Let's go beyond the individual. Let's go to his father and his family. They've been flagged. They were flagged 25 years ago. This was when he was, as you rightly mentioned, a member of a Salafist group in Libya which opposed then ruler Muammar Gaddafi. But it is because of the Western obsession with taking out whom they see as tin pot dictators. Never mind all the controversies swirling around these characters, like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, like Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, like they did in Afghanistan, stoking and supporting insurgencies opposed to those they want out has been a traditional and tragic pattern of Western, Middle Eastern diplomacy, and diplomacy usually in countries very far away from their own soil. So in a way, the Leviathan they created and they supported has come back to attack them. And it's very tragic that the victims ultimately are innocent children in this case, and innocent citizens who have nothing to do with this kind of, global politics, which usually veer around some kind of strategic advantage. In Libya's case, it was oil.
Absolutely. Daniele, and going by what Padma just said, it's very apparent. We've been hearing terms such as a surprise attack, a lone wolf attack. But if you look at the details that are emerging, it seems that British authorities should have had more than enough opportunity to nip this in the bud.
Yes, this is absolutely true. And it is also true that the Libyan community in Manchester, which we understand to be a particularly big community, had warned previously about the presence of radicalized elements within their own community. So I wonder why this suggestion has not been taken into account, because I personally think, and I perfectly agree with what Padma said, that this is the Leviathan coming back. This is what Western countries backed when they needed to overthrow the regimes that they thought. And I am not saying and justifying the actions that Colonel Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein are doing when I say this, but the Western countries decided it was time for their own profit to overthrow these dictators, so they gave weapons and trainings to these people. Then these people obviously did abandon the countries and came back to Europe, and for this very reason now we have these sort of elements. How to react to this? I think the only way is that security forces need to work at the ground level alongside communities, alongside the Libyan community in this case, or many other communities which are right now in the West. That is the only way. Because if you do that, you can understand where are the radicalized elements, what is their pattern, where are they going, where are they coming from, and therefore interacting. It doesn't mean arresting them, but it means just starting to interact. Often it's easy to stop radicalization process if you catch it soon enough.
Okay, I'll come to you with a follow-up question, but Mandy Clark's here with us on the phone line as well. Mandy, we're talking about the larger implications of the security lapse, but also there has been a lot of noise that's been made in the United Kingdom and elsewhere of the sheer size of what might be a much larger terror network. The United Kingdom is already on its most severe and critical sense of preparedness for what might come. what is the sense on the ground? Are the citizens of the country extremely concerned about their safety following what's happened in Manchester?
Yes, you are seeing quite a few people nervous. I was speaking to Londoners and Mancunians, people from Manchester, and there was a sense that they don't want to go into areas where there are large crowds because they feel like any target, any public gathering is a potential terror attack. The mother of a victim who died was on the radio today. She made a plea saying, do not change your way of life because the minute you do, they win. So we are hearing people, trying to fight that urge to hide and to change their way of life and change the way they go about it because they don't want everyone to look at any public gathering as a potential terror target. But very much so, there is concern among the general public that they don't know where we'll be targeted next. And if children are targeted, will schools be targeted? That was a conversation I was having yesterday. So there is general fear among the population.
Okay, stay with me, Mandy. Padma, obviously, the initial shock was at the victims of this terror. You pointed out there are young people who've been massacred in what happened in Manchester. But to come back to the security lapse, it's always the monkey that's been carried by South Asian countries. They're always sort of brought to book or questioned about the lack of security and intelligence. But this is exactly what's happened in Europe. Has European countries not been taken to book enough for the fact that there isn't enough intelligence that is shared and utilized effectively to prevent such things from happening?
You're absolutely right. I remember during 26/11, just after 26/11, there was a lot of criticism. Most reporting out of Mumbai focused on the criticism, which was a very valid criticism, that there was a security lapse, that it took so many hours for the commandos to arrive and all that sort of thing. And again, there was the same sort of criticism raised. I think we debated about this subject in our studio,
yes.
Aisha, about the fact that even in Germany, Germany tends to sort of wait for something to happen before reacting. So I do agree that there is, criticism as far as other people's countries are concerned, and that the West has been less than adequately prepared. In this case, as I said, there is a sharing of intelligence which is legendary between the United Kingdom and the United States. And all the parties concerned, all the parties involved knew of this family. The father had spent 25 years in England, and as Daniele pointed out, there were even more recent warnings coming from the immediate community around,
right.
The warning about this particular boy and the utterances he had made. And yet there was some lapse somewhere in, I tend to feel that the United States, for instance, he wasn't even on it's not even clear whether he was on a no-fly list, right. For the United States. Why not? I tend to think in such situations, perhaps there is a certain laxity because, let's say the United States authorities feel, oh yes, he's on our radar, but he hasn't actually crossed US borders yet. So he's out there somewhere. He's no immediate threat, right. So I think that is what needs to be better coordinated. And I mean, the larger picture is, as Daniele pointed out, as I've said before, the United States, this whole entire anti-terror coalition, and now Mr. Trump has just arrived in Brussels to seek more money from NATO countries, and I hear from sources in Berlin that decision has already been taken to say yes to Mr. Trump, right. by both France and Germany. This is the latest that I hear from Europe. So, this means that you're only intensifying what you've been doing, the same mistake over and over again for, several decades.
Is this the classic case then, Daniele, of the Occident versus the Orient, that the enemy is already preconceived, pre-decided, and the fact is that, as Padma's pointing out, with Mr. Trump in Brussels for a NATO summit, an organization that he's critiqued before, asking for money to, pump up a defense budget to fight the very same enemy. Is our lines being, forget about being drawn, they're being redrawn and sort of being dug deeper and creating an enemy with far more heads?
Definitely yes, and this is also a very American sort of way of acting, and she is perfectly right. Padma is perfectly right when she says that as long as they do not pose an immediate threat to the United States of America, that it's okay. So, and now that they are witnessing the problems, because yes, the United States of America as a country is not being attacked, but their troops are on the ground, and there will be more and more and more on the ground. There are reports of Green Berets and regions reaching in hundreds in, for instance, northern Syria. So now they are understanding that they will be very much exposed to these kind of attacks, maybe not on the ground but outside. So they are crying, I'm sorry if I am a bit critique, but they're crying for more troops, and they're asking the NATO to pay for those troops, and these troops will protect them because of wars they started alone. So this is something which, according to me, is an enormous contradiction.
Right.
And it won't be a solution for the terrorist problems we will have in Europe or all over the world within countries.
Absolutely. Padma, in fact, just to go back to your last answer, you mentioned flags being raised by the community. We're hearing of reports of the mother herself approaching British authorities to say that she was concerned about the kind of people that her son was hanging out with. So, I mean, isn't that enough of a question mark on this boy's activities? Where was the intelligence? Where were they investigating? Were they occupied elsewhere? Has Britain got so many other problems? But just going by what's happened in Europe, obviously terror is up there on the agenda.
You know, one of the core problems, yes, I absolutely agree with you. Tragic that a mother should be reporting her own son. Tragic, really, you know. But on the other hand, I think the root cause of these attitudes, especially in Europe, much more so in Europe than in the United States, and certainly not under President Trump, but under Democrat governments, is the essential, you know, the bedrock of human rights philosophies, you know. Now, this is a very vague concept, you know. When you've started wars, when you're being attacked by monsters that you have created, multi-headed hydras that you have created, and they come back to attack you, and you have an intelligence network in place, the best in the world, you know, I mean, the most superior intelligence in the world, and you don't use it adequately to protect your innocent citizens, then there is something seriously wrong somewhere, even about the philosophies that your constitutions are based on, you know. Okay. So to say that, you know, I mean, if you have enough evidence, let's say that somebody's been, I mean, this might sound extremist or it might sound drastic, but the point is, what kind of action do you take against extremists? Your actions have to be a little more than, you know, soft. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you arrest everyone,
right.
But then if you have them on your radar, and if you've received calls like this, and you also know that this boy just recently went to Syria and received training and then returned, you have all those indicators, and then to sit back and lean back on your human rights embedded constitution and say, but we can't arrest anyone, we can't, you know, even take them in for questioning because that would be a violation of his fundamental rights. What about the fundamental rights of these innocent kids who went to the concert?
Absolutely. Padma, obviously, pardon me, Mandy, if I can come across to you at this point, we are critiquing and turning the lens away from the attack itself to what has emerged since then. Are such tough questions being asked or at least being talked about in the United Kingdom? Are people angry knowing full well that there was intelligence to indicate that Salman Abedi was a concern for British authorities, but not enough was done to check at least his behavior or bring him in for questioning repeatedly to deny him or at least prevent him from carrying out this massacre in Manchester?
Well, let me just hop off on the back of Padma's answer, because just to put it in perspective, in the UK context, that Britain was in war with Northern Ireland for a very long time. Now, that was, of course, in the 90s and the 80s, but they did do these mass arrests. They did sweeping arrests, and it only made the situation worse. And that is what they've learned from doing by when they arrest everybody in a watch list, is that they sweep a lot of innocent people and they turn these people against them. And that is what counterterrorism officers, so they don't want to do. They want to learn the mistakes that they have made in the past with Northern Ireland, and that Northern Ireland started to change because they started to recognize that not everyone is a threat. And I know Padma said that she's not suggesting everybody get arrested, but that is the mentality in the context. The police are coming with their previous experience. They need to work with the community rather than alienate them. And so it's finding that right balance of having people on watch lists, knowing when to arrest them, and knowing when that, you know, is chatter and they're not likely to commit an atrocity. So it's a very delicate balance the police are trying to do, because they are trying something that they failed to do in the past, which is trying to include the Muslim community. They don't want them excluded. In regards to your question about Is there anger on the streets? Not yet. There's still a lot of grief and shock. The children died in this attack. It's coming to terms with that. But slowly people are asking questions. He was on a watch list. The family were well known to authorities. And the question is really, why wasn't he picked up? There's outrage currently with the United States. Those pictures that the New York Times have released with blood showing the bomb making, the UK is furious about it. Theresa May is planning to talk to Donald Trump today in Brussels about these leaks of information. It's stymieing the investigation here. They leaked the name of the attacker on the same day. And also they leaked these photos, which was very insensitive for parents who have lost children and those who are injured, and it also affects the investigation. So certainly Manchester police have just announced that they're going to stop sharing information with the United States, which is a massive blow, particularly with this investigation, because they can't stop the leaks and it's affecting the investigation.
Okay, that's another big thing that's been thrown up by all of this, Padma. The fact that the UK is annoyed with the United States for the release of what they call as sensitive information, photographs. In fact, Salman Abedi's name was also released by the US. Is this also demonstrative of the sort of cracks that have appeared in this intelligence sharing system? Is it safe to assume that, or are things fairly kosher at this point?
I think that's more of a, it's more of an issue of rivalry, who breaks the story first, which we also know in journalistic circles. I think it was more a question of, the UK had the information, the police inspector had the information, he was about to release the information, but the United States beat them to it first. So I don't see that particular instance. I think the Manchester police, as I said earlier, the local authorities have done a fantastic job. I mean, if you look at the speed with which they reacted immediately after the incident, the ambulances, everything was in place, as was the case in Germany and in France on several instances. But I'd like to ask Mandy what she thinks. I'd be interested in learning her views because she is in London, about the fact that, Mandy, when are the larger policies going to change of the same countries? As you're aware, President Trump has just arrived in Brussels, Aisha, and he's asking the NATO for more money, and France and Germany have actually already agreed to join, for the NATO to actually officially join the anti-terror war led by the United States and also contribute more money to NATO. So, and this is the same NATO, of course, which Trump criticized earlier, and Brussels, which he said was a hellhole, but that's where he is right now, and he's arrived to protests. But the whole point is, and I'd like to hear from Mandy what she thinks, when are the larger policies going to end, Mandy? Such as the kind we've seen the United States and all its coalitions, which always include the United Kingdom, follow in Libya, follow in Egypt even, follow in Syria, most recently in Saudi Arabia. There was a demonization, a clear demonization yet again of President Assad. We're not saying that all these gentlemen are angels, but the point is the policies have not changed. They're continuing. The Western alliances and coalitions are churning out the same policies. When is that likely to change?
Mandy?
Okay, well, I think, NATO itself is not an evil organization. It's simply an alliance of a military alliance. But you're right, the issue that keeps cropping up is these interventionist wars, and I think that's what you're referring to. It's, going into territories when they're not really involved and displacing leaders like Muammar Gaddafi, like
Saddam Hussein, for instance.
That has escaped me. Saddam Hussein. Although, of course, that wasn't a NATO alliance. That was the United States and the United Kingdom. Notably, NATO did not back that war. But the issue of interventionist wars is an issue, and right now, NATO is heavily reliant on the United States to do the majority of the funding, and in all likelihood, that they will continue to lead NATO because they are the strongest player in the alliance. So really, the question is not down to NATO. It's the leader, it's the United States. And of course, President Trump had originally said, no more wars, it's all about America, no more wasting our money in the States during the campaign. He's changed too. So it's very much an alliance, but it's very much led by one country, and that's the United States. So with him bombing Syria, with him threatening North Korea, it seems like the policy of interventionist wars isn't going to stop. And if it doesn't stop, then we are likely to see these terrorists that are formed in these countries and attack European and American soil. It does seem like a cycle.
Right. Daniel, I'd like to come to you with this. Mandy pointing out that it isn't just about NATO, it is about the most powerful country within NATO, that is the United States. And we can't forget who heads the United States. It is President Donald Trump, whose foreign policy has been, sort of an enigma ever since he's taken charge. His flip-flops on NATO, his flip-flops on Turkey, China, I mean, the list is endless. Does that even further complicate what we're looking at? And like Padma pointed out, is it time for not just a rehashing of the policy, but to completely change the way the United States, NATO and other Western powers look at the problem of terror and how it emanates?
Yes, obviously. I would like to point out the fact that, Trump's policy is not an enigma anymore, at least when it comes to the Middle East. It has become very clear with his last journey to Riyadh. He chose his side. His side is with the Sunni Saudi Arabians against Iran, so in an anti-Iran optic, which means anti-Assad, anti-Lebanon, pro-Israel and pro-Sunni, because he is also playing a very good balance between the relationship between Saudi Arabia and therefore the Sunni powers that they have influence on, and Israel, okay, keeping I would say, one foot in two shoes. So that is what is happening right now, and that is obviously going to increase the problems. Why? Because the foreign policy that he's most likely to take, well, he actually already started, is more bombs everywhere, more military presence everywhere, scaling up Afghanistan, deciding to support the Kurds in Syria, ramping up the number of strikes I receive. Obviously, the daily communication from the coalition forces, they are increasing the number of airstrikes, both in Iraq and Syria, and we have seen it because of the increasing number of civilian victims.
Right.
This is going to jeopardize the situation way further. And yes, it is time to change this kind of policy.
Padma,
more bombs does not mean more security.
Okay. Padma, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, I was only, interested in picking Daniela's brains about how different, why would you imagine the Trump's policy as far as the Middle East is concerned, Syria is concerned? It may have intensified under Trump, certainly, given the recent announcements, the $110 billion deal that he's signed in Saudi Arabia, and this Shia-Sunni game that he's playing there. But surely American policy in those regions, in those countries, was not that much different, Daniele, under earlier Democrat governments. It was exactly the same. It may have intensified, it may have taken on new avatars or new patterns, under Trump. And of course, every president that comes in wants to leave his mark on certain existing policy. But I would imagine that in the Middle East, I think we agree on that, US-led policy, and I wasn't actually talking about NATO. What I referred to earlier on was that the United States is now, the president is now in Europe to ask, actually to demand the two big countries of NATO, France and Germany, to give the NATO more financial support, and also in terms of boots on the ground, which they are reluctant to do because of their own constitutions and their own immediate problems with the arrival of Syrian refugees. But secretly, the decision apparently has already been made.
Taken.
And in many ways, they have no choice because they are the front line, as Mandy was saying, much more so than the United States, actually.
Right. Daniele, also, just going by everything that's been said so far, there's no doubt, like you're mentioning, all our panelists are mentioning, that there is a dire need for a change in policy. Is the fact that we're hearing about attacks being claimed by the ISIS in places that we never imagined them to? I'm referring, for instance, to what happened in Somalia yesterday. The ISIS has never claimed an attack in Somalia, but it's happened there. We're seeing ISIS-backed militants taking over an entire island in Indonesia, prompting martial law to be brought in. So the spread of terror, forget about ISIS, I'm talking about the resurgence of the Al-Qaeda, of Taliban as well. It is a multi-headed hydra, as Padma pointed out. So obviously the demand is for a change in policy, but who is the country or the group of countries that is going to initiate that conversation? Because clearly the West doesn't seem to be changing their policy at all.
For a long time, I have relied on India on this. Okay, I think it's time for a neutral. Neutral maybe is a little bit too strong, because India is not that neutral even in West Asia, but more neutral than other countries. It's probably time for a neutral country to step in this. Because I see no game changers here other than neutral countries. It cannot be China. China has a very clear policy. Whatever happens within a nation is not our concern.
Right.
And they always have business to do, and they do business with whoever. It's a very realistic kind of having diplomatic relations. We want to do this business. Can you grant us this business? Yes, can you? Okay, no problem. Human rights violation, this kind of situation is not a problem for us. The United States are obviously at the forefront of a more than a decade-long war on terror, which ultimately has made the world more unsafe than before. I mean, which is an irony, because they said we are going to war to prevent the world to be an unsafe place, and what has happened is that we have increased amount of terror attacks, and not only in Europe, because now we are focusing on Europe, but let's not forget that the maximum number of attacks happens on daily basis in that West Asia, in that Afghanistan, where they decided to intervene in order to bring peace, which is obviously not happening.
Fair enough. I've run out of time on this segment, so I'm going to have to wrap up. But I'm glad we had this conversation, because clearly the lens has to be turned away from where it is right now. And the questions that have been thrown up by Manchester demand serious analysis and questioning by, like you're pointing out, perhaps neutral countries like India. Daniele Pagani, Padma Rao and Mandy Clark, thanks so much, all three of you, for weighing in on the conversation with us. It's a wrap on this edition of the Newscast. I'm Aisha Sindhu. More news and updates follow on the other side. Do stay tuned to WION.